some of you know, I don't know that all of you know, some of you know that a big piece of the work that I do and my particular passion, if you will, is to think about person-centered practices for people who have critical, chronic, or very often likely life-ending illnesses. And I spend a fair amount of time, probably sounds a bit bizarre, but I spend a fair amount of time with people who are very, very sick and frequently dying. And about a decade ago, actually one of the members of the Learning Committee, Joe D'Onofrio from Choices in California, and I were working through a process of thinking about how best to support somebody in their agency who was dying. And I had been doing some training, and I'd been talking about person-centered practices and care at end of life, and the question that continually came up was, so what are the steps? What's the next step? So what do we do? And Joe and I literally sat on his patio one evening, did some training, and sat on his patio one evening, and on a cocktail napkin, we started drawing out step by step. So when you think about decision making, and in that particular case it was in the context of pretty critical healthcare issues, what are the steps we need to walk through? And through that and a few other processes came this decisional map kind of process. So what I want to do is take about 10 minutes and try to kind of talk you through this, and then we're going to kind of play out a scenario. What I've learned is it's not just about healthcare. It's absolutely not just about healthcare. It is very much, this framework is very much designed when you have a decision in front of you, it could be the person, it could be you, it could be a team. You have a decision in front of you that feels immensely difficult and critical, however you define that, feels critical. And people around that decision are kind of going, I don't have a clue what to do. And I will say, because we have a short time to do this, if you want to talk more about this, I'm really happy to do that, obviously. Where's Valerie and Claudia? So Val and Claudia also can also share, perhaps if they have some time. They've used this process a lot, actually, with several people in their agency who have been supported through the end of their life, and really, really, thank you, I should say, continue to say to me how well it sort of helps them think that through. So if you want to sort of think that through on a real level, that may be helpful. So let me do this, because this is the simple piece. And the other thing to say is that this assumes that this framework assumes that, if you will, the kind of prequel to this is you know the person well enough to know how they make decisions, what kind of information they like, how they process through, that you have some kind of set of information about that. It may be a decision profile, and the reason that Julie and I tomorrow, I think it's tomorrow, Thursday, whichever day we said, are going to do the Learning Marketplace session on decisional agreements and profiles, is because both of our frameworks really assume that at the front end you have some working knowledge, and we just don't have time to teach that process here, so Learning Marketplace is the way to do that. I think that from a person-centered standpoint, the way that we keep the person at the heart of the decisional process and the way that we respect that person's engagement in the decisional process all the way through is the very first question has to be, is this even a good time for this person to make the decision? Are they well? Are they healthy? Do they feel capable? Do they feel confident? Are they literally awake? Or are we going into their hospital room at 5 in the morning and arousing them and saying, oh, by the way, we need to know if you can consent for this treatment? Have they just been heavily sedated with pain meds? Is this even a good time? Well, this is what I often refer to as the yes path. And the challenge here is that this is the simplest and clearest path, and it almost never happens. So I should just warn you. But in this path, is it a good time for the person? And you will know that because you have some kind of decision profile or some set of information. And in this case, we're saying, yeah, it is a good time. Person's alert, they're wide awake, they're engaged with us, they're paying attention. Yep, it's a good time for them to make this decision. The next question becomes, and this is where, from an academic standpoint, we start to get hung up. So it's a good time. Is the person capable? And that is not about competency. There are dramatic differences between competency and capacity, and I can spend hours on that, and I have minutes. The gist of this is capacity says, does the person recognize that they have the authority to make this decision? Do they understand the risks and benefits, the upside and the downside of the decision they're about to make? Can they tell you why they're making the decision that they're making? Right? And does that decision align with what we know about that person's core values for their life? Right? And that is, in a nutshell, capacity. It has nothing to do with competency, which is, I've been to court and somebody says, I'm incompetent. We have, unfortunately, lots of people who have been adjudicated incompetent by a court system who are perfectly capable, all right? But that becomes the crux of this. Is this person capable of making this decision? Yeah, and I can give you much more, but the people that have sort of done the most research on that is Rizzo and Applebaum. But it's, does the person recognize they have the authority? So there's a self-determination factor there. Do they recognize the risks and benefits, the upside and the downside of making the decision? Can they tell you the reason why, essentially? And nowhere in the literature does it say they have to be able to talk or use words to tell you why. And the fourth piece is the decision the person's making, does it sort of align with what we know to be their core values? And I sort of left out a piece, I'm sorry, the second piece of that, it shows up in different places in different definitions, but all of that is also built on the assumption that the person is doing that free of coercion, that nobody's talking them into or out of it. Okay? And so again, in this path, is it a good time? Yes, it is. Does the person have capacity? We evaluate that. Yes, it is. Yes, they do. And so the person makes the decision. Well, if you think about our system, it's never that simple. And what we more often are faced with is this sort of, we don't really know place. And in this path, is it a good time? Does this have a laser? It does. Is this a good time? You know what? We're not really sure. I don't really know if it's a good time for her. And that leads us to another place, which is we then have to determine what's the urgency of this decision? What's the significance? How important to the person is this? How clinically urgent, important for is this decision? And we have to then make some decisions. We have to make some determination about that. The question then becomes at that point, does this decision have to be made right now? And I can tell you that in almost every, I don't even think almost every scenario I've been involved with people with really critical illnesses, almost never does this decision have to be made right now. Almost never. If somebody is if there's something that seriously wrong at that moment, we ought to be calling 911 and they should be taking the person to the operating room. And I mean that seriously. Those are, you know, I had to make a decision about removing life support. And they said to me, you have to decide right now. Well, they didn't say that. I said, do I have to decide right now? Well, we have to figure this out soon. But I didn't have to stand on that spot and say yes or no. We had time to call people and invite people to come visit and spend last moments. And so that, what I've learned is that question is like the absolute hinge for all of this. Does this decision have to be made right now? Because if it doesn't, we have time. And if we have time, And if we're not sure if the person is capable of making this decision, we have time to help them become capable. We have time to teach them that they have the authority. We have time to teach them the risks and benefits. We have time to help them understand the rationale for their decisions. And that time is critical. So, if we have time, or does the decision have to be made right now? The purple line says no. We have time, inform, educate, and practice. And then what happens is you just end up in this loop. You just end up in this loop for a while. So we've informed, we've educated, we've practiced. Is it now a good time? Well, it might be, but what if it's not? And so the problem with this loop is you're eventually going to run out of time. At some point you're going to ask the question, does the decision have to be made now? And the answer is going to be yes. Yeah, we do have to make a decision now. We've waited 24 hours, we've waited 2 weeks, whatever it is. We do have to make a decision now. And that leads us to this place of, so if we have to make this decision now, is this person capable of making the decision? And if the answer to that is no, and this is where our system gets stuck, the answer to that is there's a decision to be made. There might or not be a guardian. Assume for a second there's not a guardian or conservator. Who the heck's going to make the decision? And thus we get to this whole notion of healthcare power of attorney, supported decision-making, surrogate decision-makers. Again, it's a shameless plug. It's a 2-day training. People planning ahead. But I can't do it here in 5 minutes, okay? In this path, the person is not capable. And we have to identify who is. Michael? Capacity and competency. So the simple difference between competency and capacity is a legal process. So you have to go to court, and the judge or the clerk of court has to say, people have proven, which we all know is really a bit of bull honky, if you will. People have proven to us that you are not able to make decisions for yourself, so the court, we deem you to be incompetent. Capacity is not a legal process, it's a clinical process.
Is there any, I'll talk about it so I don't think, but capacity that you can support and build capacity over time is, can we think of, I know the courts don't think of it in that way, but is that a differentiation also?
Well, capacity is situation and time specific. That's one of the really unique things about it. So when we say, is the person capable of making this decision right now? The answer might be no. 2 weeks from now, is the person capable of making the decision? Yes, they are. Capacity is situation and time specific. It is never you have it once, you always have it. It is never you don't have it, you never will. It is it is literally the box you're standing in. Can you make this decision today, here and now? And if the answer to that's no, then you go back to does the decision have to be made right now? No. Well, let's step out of the box and let's take the time to teach the person what they need to know to make this decision. You might still get to know. You might have time, and you might still get to, you know what, he really doesn't understand the risks and benefits. Really doesn't understand it. And so then you might have to have a decision maker, which again is why in my world we really, really push for surrogate decision making and healthcare powers of attorney, so that we're not talking guardianship, but there is somebody identified who can, a trusted soul who the person has chosen who can make a decision for that person. Does that make a little bit of sense? It's really hard to do this in 10 minutes. Okay, so a few months ago I was with an agency and they were really struggling around supporting a woman named Janice. We're going to call Janice. This is an agency in the Deep South, and it's very, very, very hot in the summer. Janice is this lovely young woman, lots of fun, people like her, lives in a small group home, spends her days in a very traditional segregated day program. Except that she really doesn't, because Janice gets to the day program every morning and she refuses to go inside. And she stays outside. And in the winter, it's not such a big deal because it doesn't get very cold in this place. But in the summer, it is sweltering. 100 and plus degrees, 80% humidity. And what Janice does is she lays down on the cement sidewalk. And she lays down all day. And she gets sunburned, and she's had heat stroke, and she's really, really at risk for being hurt. And what staff are being told is, it's her choice. To be fair, direct support professionals actually get that it's really, this doesn't quite feel like her choice, they say, but their supervisors are saying, it's her choice. We have, as an agency, a no hands-on policy, and they're proud of that, as well they should be. We do not put our hands on the people we support. It's her choice. So, again, this is, oops. What I want you to do is, remember there's sort of essentially three paths here. There's the, yes, the person's capable, and so they make the decision path. There's the, we're not really sure, so how much time do we have? Let's think about this for a while path. And then there's the, it's a bad time for this person, and they are not capable, and somebody else has to decide. You've got a little bit more detail in Janice's story on your table. You have a copy of the matrix. I'd like you to take about 10 minutes, kind of think it through, play it out. There's some things that you don't know, that you would, and so you might also ask, you might sort of know, what else would they need to know, and then we're going to talk a little bit about it. And we have a microphone, and thank you, Eddie. So just a couple of quick observations. I think most people sort of got to the place that I was hoping people would get to, which is, as we tell the story, it's at first blush, it's easy to perceive it as a decision about can Janice decide yes or no, essentially, if she wants to lie on the sidewalk. But most people sort of get to the place of figuring out that she's made a really clear decision about what? Not going to the day, right. Like you keep driving me to this day program and I keep not going in, right? And I keep telling you in larger and larger ways, one of the famous Michael Small quotes from, way, way back when, before any of us had gray hair, was, people will shout at us with their behavior when we don't listen. She's shouting pretty loudly. So, thoughts, other questions? Eddie's ready with the mic. So what'd you think?
I just felt that it was really hard to decide if she was capable of making that decision without more information.
Right. And yet,
about her, because we don't know her.
Right, so we don't have that set of information we need.
Right.
And how many people have disabilities for whom decisions are made all the time by people who have no knowledge of them, right? Other thoughts? Lori?
The thing we really struggled with was that, of course, she's in this bad situation of making this decision because of all these bad programming. And so we kind of struggled with the decision as we saw it was heat stroke, right? Or
Was
heat stroke or burning.
Right,
So
right. That's one. There's a whole bunch of decisions.
Decision,
Right.
And so, and where you have to decide where her competency lies, and of course,
Or capacity.
her capacity, yes. So we had multiple decision trees depending on what issue we were considering, and that was kind of challenging for us.
Right, and that's, I'll tell you, in my experience in doing this is that I'm often the person who's, I'm the consultant, so I'm asked to sit at the table with the team and help them sort through it. And I walk in the room and they always say to me, so we have to decide this. And I just start asking questions. And all of a sudden, there's not one decision on the table, but there's 16 decisions. And people go, oh. And stuff just keeps getting surfaced and keeps getting surfaced. And, you know, it's the best way to walk through it, but it's never simple. Other thoughts? Yeah. Janet and Fatma. Either way around.
One statement that was made on the table was, we got to the box that said informed, educated, practice, and the conversation was, who needs to be informed, educated? Like, good question, right? Janice, or is it us as the boards?
Right.
That was a good conversation we had.
Great.
One of the things that happened in our conversation is that I don't believe it's a foregone conclusion that she's refusing to go to work. So what I saw was less of a decision, and I had just a big question mark is, you know, of course I come from a behavioral perspective, so is it, I don't want to go inside because it's too cold? Is it because the person who sits next to me smells like onions? Is it because I have that perception problems and it looks like I'm flying off a cliff? So, you know, as we started talking about most of the decision things we made, we were really saying we really should not make the assumption that this is not about going. This is about not going into the workshop. But before we can even counter that decision, we need to really start thinking about it. We had a lot of options and things that we could do while we can do that. Right? We could bring an umbrella. Right. You know, we could build a thing that has a little shade spot, a place where they have where it's not putting her at risk. We could give her some ice water. We could figure out how to give her information. So we weren't real quick in the decision making, but we had a lot of questions. Right.
Other thoughts? Yeah, I'm sorry. Sarah.
Can I encourage people who speak to stand up? That'd be great. Thank you.
We had a really interesting conversation about capacity in that moment and how maybe when she's lying on the ground in the hot, sweltering sun, she might not have the capacity to make that decision in that moment. But if we, at home, 2 hours earlier, when she's waking up for the day or in the evening, that her capacity could change, which would alter that decision-making process.
So I really need to respect time here because Bob's up in about 2.5 minutes. So one more thought, and then I'll tell you the rest of the story. She's not still just sweltering in the sun somewhere. People did figure this out. Right. Please don't make me forget. I'll tell you. Any other thoughts? Great. So the rest of the story. You know, we sort of said to the agency, there's immediate things that does this decision have to be made right now? There is a decision that has to be made right now, at least one, which is, what do we do about the fact that she is really at risk for heat stroke and she's putting her life at risk? So there's that. And then there's the decisions that we have time to make, which are the ones about what's going on. Why doesn't she want to enter this building? And in the sort of, no pun intended, in the heat of the moment, in that moment of really, not meaning that way, in that anxiety, staff are really seeing the decision as very black and white, yes, no. Either go in the building or don't go in the building. And we sort of walked through you know, what if there's a little bit of both, or in the sun, out of the sun, but not inside? So you buy one of the easy to put up shade kinds of things that, you know, parents take to soccer games, and you keep a cooler full of ice water, and you set up a place. If it's really about, I don't want to, in the immediate, we still have to figure out long term, why doesn't she want to go in the building? But in the short term, we have to get her out of the blazing sun. So let's give her a way to be out of the building, but someplace safe. And because it's a very traditional agency, she can't stay home, quote unquote, during the day. That's a whole nother story, as you all know. You know, we're not staffed during the day and all that stuff. So buy a shade, which is what people did, get a big cooler full of ice water, and negotiate. When she gets up, in fact, Sarah was absolutely on the right track. When she gets up in the morning, we have a conversation about if you're going to go today, we're going to go, but you don't have to go in the building. 20 minutes in the sun, 10 minutes out. 10 minutes in the sun, 15 minutes out. We're going to negotiate around that. Friends of yours who are in the building can come out and hang out with you. They can sit outside with you. We can do lots of things outside. The only option that's not on the table is lie in the sun on the sidewalk and hurt yourself badly. And also then said, you know, as an agency, you have to consider, what if none of this works? What's the safe landing? And the safe landing might be, we will help you get out of the sun if we have to, which they didn't have to. But that was really hard for them because they were just heels dug in on, we don't put our hands on people, which I love. But the alternative to we don't put our hands on people is, you're going to watch her die? Well, no. That's kind of what you're saying. You've gotten into this yes or no place, and it's not yes or no. So she is not sitting in the blazing sun, hanging out outside. Last time I was there, drinking ice water, having some fun, has an iPod, listening to music, friends come visit, and they're trying to figure out what she wants to do during the day. Thanks, and I'm happy to, again, talk to you more about it. If we want to do a learning marketplace session around the real specific healthcare stuff in this, I'm happy to do that as well, or just find times to chat about it. Thanks.